Hey friends, welcome to Experience Data Talk, a show featuring data science leaders from around the world. Today, we get a chance to learn from Dr. Shervin Khodabandeh. Shervin co-leads Boston Consulting Group's AI business in North America. Shervin has nearly 20 years of experience in driving business impact from AI, and he's worked with premier brands across the globe in consumer, retail, financial services, travel, energy, and healthcare. He's also an expert in organization-wide analytics transformation. He's helped numerous companies devise their analytical strategies, drive growth and margin through analytics solutions, and build strong internal teams and capabilities. Shervin earned his PhD and Master's of Science degrees in Chemical Engineering from Caltech and his BS in Chemical Engineering from UCLA. So I found out about Shervin through a new report that just came out in MIT Sloan Management Review called Winning with AI. And if you've not checked it out, you definitely got to Google it, read it. It is chock full with great insights. It's based on a 2019 AI global executive study around how business leaders and organizations are using AI and the challenges people are having, as well as some of the opportunities. It is just packed with insights, so definitely check it out when you get a chance. In today's podcast, Shervin shares advice for leaders who want to lead business transformation, how to effectively manage and launch AI strategies. He talks about why it's important to constantly challenge assumptions. He discusses steps for making business decisions when you don't have enough data, and why it's important to find comfort in ambiguity. Now, as you'll hear in today's show, Shervin is just so interesting and provides so many awesome insights. He is a wealth of knowledge. I took a ton of notes. I walked away challenged, and I'm excited to share this conversation with you. Before we get started, Shervin, I thought it'd be really cool if you could share a little bit about kind of your background. You mentioned to me that you have been overseeing and looking at AI over the last, was it 20 years you said?
Greater part of the last 20 years, yeah.
Because I feel like AI is one of those topics that has been more of a more recent discussion. And so it's fascinating to me that you have been, this is like nothing new to you. And I was wondering maybe you can kind of share kind of like your kind of entry into AI and how and your observations over the years.
Sure, should be happy to. So where should we begin? Let me go backwards in chronological order. So over the last, I would say, 10 years, I've been working with many large companies as well as medium-sized companies to sort of build and deploy AI and advanced analytics capabilities and really get business impact from it. It's been the last 5 years, I would say, that the topic has really gotten attention. It was a curiosity before that. So my own background started, I have a PhD in chemical engineering. I went into consulting, business consulting, right after grad school. And after a few years, I then helped co-found a business intelligence company back in early 2000. And then after that, a few years later, I was part of a founding group of a pure play data analytics company that really started exploring with a lot of advanced techniques that are pretty well known in many other fields, like in physics or biology or DNA research and academia, but hadn't really seen impact yet in business. So that's sort of the next sort of 10 years was there. And then now I'm a senior partner at Boston Consulting Group, and I'm the co-lead of our North American AI practice. And we have built a pretty big business around AI because it's a major sort of area of focus and demand for many of our clients.
Going back to when you were just finishing up your doctorate in chemical engineering, what led you to like kind of leave academia? Because you could have continued in your research, teaching.
Yeah.
What drove you into business?
I was very intrigued by the open-endedness of business problems, which was actually interestingly what got me into academia to begin with too, which is actually the open-endedness and the possibility and exploring different ways and challenging assumptions and all that. And I saw that's really what sort of good business executives do. So I was very intrigued by that. I liked consulting in particular because it's sort of shorter term projects where you really go deep and understand something. You see the impact much sooner. than in many other areas. And then the team aspect of it. So all of those things, fast learning, working in diverse teams, and the open-endedness really appealed to me. So that's why I made the move.
What have you found to be like a really key component to you being successful in consulting? 'Cause that's a very, very niche area where you're just focusing on a specific business problem or a challenge for a certain period of time, and then you're moving on to something else. What do you think has been, because you found it very fascinating, but I'm kind of curious, like what makes you successful at it?
I think there's a few things that any good consultant, sort of develops or has over time. I mean, I would say one is sort of comfort with ambiguity
Hmm.
and the ability or the sort of the getting pleasure out of really exploring, is this really the problem statement? Uh, you know, um, Einstein said, I think it was Einstein, it's like 50% or 90% of getting to an answer is actually formulating the problem. So
Hmm.
I think that's important. I think just so ability to sort of work in teams and an influence, and because ultimately to get any impact, you have to get organizations to do things differently. I think that's important. I think curiosity, like really, really wanting to learn and wanting to explore. And the thing that I find particularly interesting for me is the interconnectedness of different disciplines and how
Hmm.
archetypes of problems in different fields, in different fields in academia and different fields of business, there's not hundreds of different archetypes of problems, right? There's sort
Hmm.
of a couple of dozen of archetypes, and how sort of these problems uh, transcend domains, and how you think about, for example, a problem in forecasting or risk management. You could sort of think about many of those aspects in marketing or in different fields. So that sort of ability to sort of not keep going deep and
Hmm.
realizing the interconnectedness of the whole ecosystem. I think those are all sort of, so when we're hiring folks, those are some of the traits we're looking for. Um, and also, being really, you know, good in just, math and analytics and like ability to sort of take a business concept and deconstruct it into its key drivers.
What helped you along the way, leaving academia, having your PhD, going deep in chemical engineering, and then going into business? And you brought with that your curiosity, your questioning, your knowledge of math and science into business. And you just mentioned about the importance of going broad in understanding these different fields. As you started to like improve your own work and the way that you do consulting, what were some of the areas that you like early on were like, oh, I need to get better in this area if I want to be a good consultant?
So I think as a scientist, uh, I think, the first couple of years, I really said I need to really understand sort of fundamental business concepts. And you could pick up books and take courses, but ultimately no substitute than just actually doing it. So that was one thing. Um, I think, like anything else, you need to have develop a specialization and a focus. So you can't just stay broad. And when I was talking about broad, I don't mean like you just sort of scratch the surface. I mean that
Mm-hmm.
even as you're going deep, you're not sort of myopic, and you bring in different concepts together. So I found that interesting. And then for me, what was really interesting was the ability to deconstruct a business problem, like whether it is to predict something or to figure out an anomaly or a pattern or something, and how that unleashes a business impact. And it always starts with that business problem, right? Now, some business problems do not require massive amount of data and analytics. But more and more, as people go deeper and deeper, uh, that makes a big impact in many areas.
So you talked about the importance of asking the really good questions for business problems, and I'm wondering, like, in your work, as you've been meeting with different organizations over the years, have you been like leaders come to you with like a business problem and with a question, and as you began thinking about it, you realize that the question is not quite right. There's actually a deeper, more important question underneath it.
So it always starts with the business problems, and we're talking about AI and analytics, and you know, without a strong formulation of a business problem, it's just a hammer looking for a nail. So it starts with a business objective. The objective is usually pretty well defined, right? We've got to improve margin or improve market share or growth or reduce fraud or whatever, right? So that's really well defined. The next step is really deconstructing what are the business drivers of that particular thing. So, let's pick fraud, right? So what are the different types of fraud? And what is the value of predicting and getting ahead of that? And so that sort of, I would say, is the next layer, which is like the business case effectively, right? And then the next layer down is what I call the key drivers, right? So what actually is a driver of that thing that whether it's fraud. Let's pick fraud.
Yeah.
What is the actual driver of that? Is it a third party fraud or second party fraud, or is it an authentication problem, or is it a transaction problem? So what are all those components? And so as you go deeper and deeper, you sort of realize that there are structural problems, as in the workflow or the process or those things. And then you realize that there are core sort of data and analytics problems, which is, can you get ahead of early indicators of something and certain signals and say, well, that's a signal of this kind? Can you connect the dots across different types of fraud? Can you sort of get better at that? And I think that's where data science comes into play. And that is where a very good problem formulation is very critical. Sort of say, okay, I've got a business problem and I've got the subcomponents of that business problem into business questions. Now I have to translate this into analytics questions. And I think that's really what a good data scientist and a good sort of translator between data science and business will do, right? And incidentally, I find that the same problem statement and the same data, different teams get drastically different answers just because of the assumptions they make or their sort of hesitation to go deeper or challenge the going in assumptions or ask questions, or the methodology that they use because somebody told them you've always got to use, reinforcement learning for this, so I'm going to use it, or assuming the data set as is and I can't add to it. So all of those things. So that, I think, is really where comfort with ambiguity, challenging, going back and forth, and that's really, really critical. So if you say, like, what is the one thing that sets aside high performance teams from sort of not so everything else being the same background and pedigree and experience, I think it's that. I think that's the way of working, which is you can't sit in a cubicle because some business guy is giving you a problem and you say, okay, I got to figure out the straight line or the curved line between this and that. You have to really interact. And so what we see in high performance teams is it's almost always cross-functional, rooted in agile principles where teams work together, they have a shared objective, they're allowed freedom to explore ideas, fail fast, do a whole bunch of test and learn, and iteratively get better, rather than spend 6 months in design and 6 months in build and 6 months in implementation. And I think that's where the fun really happens. And then from that point on, then you have a solution to that problem, but you're not done because the boundary conditions change, the business situation changes. So it has to have a feedback loop. It has to keep getting better and better and better. So this whole process, I think, has been a mindset shift from, let's say, 10 years ago, where all of these were viewed as sort of technology solutions, right? So old school technology solution was built by some business requirements, a good 6 to 12 months of design, a good sort of 6 to 18 months of build, and a 6 to whatever months of implementation. And then 3 years have gone, and then you begin to see impact. And then you say, oh, this is off, or we're not seeing what we need to, but it's now we're sort of embedded in this, so it's really hard to course correct. Whereas if you look at how AI solutions are being built and getting scaled, it's totally different, right? It is 3 months to a minimum viable product that's in market or in the field and has some feedback loop and it's being better. And then the next version builds on top of it. So very much sort of modern product roadmap, modern architecture, continued sort of loops of learning, which is really, I think, one of the secrets of getting value from AI.
What are some of the problems you've seen that have caused hiccups or things that slow down this agile process?
I think, look, I mean, at the senior management level, I think, one is, I mean, there's two different sort of levels, right? So one is, I would say, cultural, which is sort of the fabric of the organization and how they work. And one is which is sort of the mindset of the organization, right? I do feel that in many organizations that are struggling with getting value from AI, there is a high level of ignorance and fear and uncertainty around this, right? And it's sort of, what I call is the proof of concept syndrome, which is management says, okay, we've heard about AI. You data scientists go build some stuff and see what you come up with. So people go and build stuff. And yeah, of course it works because it's been proven to work. So they come up with all this stuff. But there is no thought given to how it would scale, what business processes have to change, who are the stakeholders, how would we continue to invest behind it, what is the underlying data and digital infrastructure that has to support it, what's sort of the long-term product roadmap. It's none of that, right? So people come back with, oh, my model is 90% accurate or 80% selective or whatever. But management looks at all those as failed experiments because it hasn't scaled. So I think the most important thing starts with the mindset, and it's one of the findings of the report as well, which is you got to start with the core business strategy and ask yourself, where is it that AI can make a big difference in terms of our profit equation, in terms of our competitive positioning, in terms of where we want to go. You have to pick those areas. We call those, the AI unicorns, meaning that, there are several, but you cannot pick 100. You have to pick a few. And that's where you're going to focus. I think if you have that, and then you also realize that process has to change. Business process, how we do customer servicing pre and post AI will be different. How we do marketing pre and post AI is different. How we do risk management, fraud management pre and post AI is different. If you have those two ingredients, which, by the way, they're not tech or science ingredients, right? If you have those two ingredients, the path is going to be a lot smoother. And so for business process to change, it has to be important, which means it has to be strategic. And for it to create value, then business process has to change. An interesting finding from the report was when you ask like 3,000 respondents, right? What is the source of struggle? I mean, the very question, Michael, that you're asking, they do say it's, ability to build data science teams and having the technology, but it's not the number one or two or three response. The number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is much more around having stakeholder buy-in, management believing, having a clear business case, embedding in culture, embedding in process. And when you ask yourself, well, these are not AI problems, these are business transformation problems. So if you're going in with the mindset of some algorithm, some tool, you're going to end up with an algorithm and a tool. If you go in with a mindset of business transformation, then you get value. And that's why it's very important to start with that mindset. It doesn't mean you have to launch a $50 million project from the beginning, but it has to be important. And you always ask yourself, why am I doing it? Well, because it ties to my business strategy. If you don't have that tie, you might as well stop and not do anything. And the second thing is we have a policy in our group when we do work is that unless we have a good sense of like how the business process is going to change, how that customer service rep is going to do something different, or how that risk agent or the marketing person or the customer will do something different, you can't really write a single line of code, because what do you what are you writing for? You have to sort of
Mm.
anticipate the change that you want to make and work backwards from that.
For the leaders that are out there listening in, that they're looking to make that change, that culture shift, but like you said, there's got to be buy-in from the stakeholders. There's got to be unity there. How does how do leaders begin to kind of create that shift in the mindset?
So it starts again with the core business strategy, right? So leaders of many companies, all companies, spend a large amount of time and resources on thinking about their business strategy, right? They have strategic
Mhm.
planning, meetings and sessions and processes and all that, right? For many businesses, many sectors, if AI is not in that dialogue, they are missing something, right? Now, the good news is we did the report, and for 90% of businesses across sectors, they say, no, this is important. It's a strategic risk or a strategic opportunity. So that belief is there. It didn't used to be there 5 years
Mm.
ago. So it was like, is it for us? Is it for everyone? Now it's most people realize that is important. I think that's where it starts. The second thing is they need to think of this as a business transformation. The same way that you think of it as I'm going to transform my customer experience, or I'm going to dramatically transform my uh, account uh, account management, or I'm going to transform my sales process. You have to think of it that way. And so you have the mindset, you have the ambition, and then the rest is problem solving. But without those two, then all you've got is very smart people
Mm.
in earnest solving very tough problems,
Mm.
where just like in academia, you could have a very elegant solution to a tough problem, but unless you have the engineering and the industry to sort of put it in technology that the society will use, it will not go very far.
Curious about your advice for the practitioners, the data scientists, the people that are working on the ground on some of these problems. In past data talks, we've talked to people about the difficulty in learning how to, I guess, translate tech talk
Mm,
to the leaders and
yeah,
be able to say the things that need to be said in a way that's going to pique the leader's interest, going to speak their language.
yeah,
And I was wondering, like, what advice you have for those practitioners who are like, you know what, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I want to be in a leadership role. I need to learn to talk like a leader. I need to be able to present these problems in a way that's going to interest a leader. And I was wondering if you can share any advice for these young folks.
I would say three things, minimally three things. I think one is you have to be good at your art, at your trade. So, uh, because we are at an era where technique and method makes a difference, right? So, really, really, uh, for a data scientist, be good. You don't have to be the best in deep learning, but you have to be proficient. You have to understand sort of the basics of data science, the basics of measurement, statistics, all that. That's one. I think two is have a broader appreciation of the ecosystem that
Mm.
the data science fits into. So, because you said for specific data scientists, so
Mm-hmm.
if you think about the AI ecosystem, right, is a data foundational. There is a whole bunch of sort of algos and models, which is sort of the artifact of the data scientist. There's a bunch of applications that sit on top of it, which is really how impact comes, and then there is the process of changing. So have an appreciation of that whole ecosystem. Understand what the data and digital architecture looks like. Understand what it takes to put models in production. So not be deep in your trade, but have a broader understanding.
Mm.
And that's important because you don't have to be a data engineer or a machine learning engineer if you're a data scientist, but you need to understand what those guys do. And those guys need to understand what you do. And then the third thing is it goes back to what we were talking earlier, which is learn, and this really happens by practice, how to translate between a business problem and a analytics or AI problem, and learn to look for the drivers and how those drivers could be better predicted or preempted or described through your algorithms. And that doesn't mean that you have to be an expert in account servicing or in customer servicing or risk management business process. But it means you have to have the curiosity to really ask, what is the business problem we're trying to solve? Why this one? Are you sure we need to predict at 5-minute increments? Why? You give me this data set, but why can't I go use external data set? Like be comfortable to think broader than the problem statement that you're given. I think that's really, really, really critical, because the problem is that most business problems don't know what's possible. And so if the art of the possible is not known, and you're the data scientist that's trying to help the organization understand the art of the possible, then you have to have that dialogue and get comfortable with that dialogue. People who really, really succeed in this business are people that think of the AI problem that they're solving in the broader ecosystem that it fits in, rather than this is the input, this is the output, how do I best connect them?
And this goes back to something you were saying in the beginning about the ambiguity, like being comfortable in ambiguity. And I'm wondering if you could talk to those folks who are out there who feel like, because there's a lot of risk in ambiguity in making decisions without having all the data points, and you can't wait for the case study. You have to move. So can you talk to those who are just hesitant in making decisions because they feel like, well, if I just had a little more data, then we can proceed?
Yeah, I think that's a very good observation, right? Because there's many organizations that say, let me wait, let me build. First, I got to build my super duper data platform and all that. It goes back to that sort of agile ways of working, right? Which is, it's ultimately a mindset change and a way of working change. And one person alone cannot create that shift, right? So because what's the way of working to get value from AI is one where you're fundamentally working in pods, in small teams that are cross-functional, that are daily getting together, that they are jointly solving problems, but they're not all part of the same business unit. You've got the data scientist, you've got the data engineer, you've got the risk guy, you've got the branding guy, you've got the legal guy, sort of working together. And for many organizations, that process of AI development does not exist, because they revert back to the technology development process, which is inadequate for this, right? So that's a new business process. The process of building and deploying AI and iterating on it is a new process for many organizations. That has to be built. And so assuming that's there, and then you as a practitioner or you and your team are sort of saying, well, how do I get the most out of it? I would say you have to start having the business dialogue. And if there is no business dialogue, this is not going to go far. So you need to create that business dialogue. The business has to understand what is possible. And many organizations that do this well is they have this ongoing dialogue between the business and the process owner and the technical guys, where they really see themselves as one team. You have to sort of figure out what's the way to create that. In many, I would say, digital organizations in Silicon Valley, what I'm telling you sounds funny because that's sort of how they operate. They don't have to change anything. Like, that's actually how they operate. So but for 90% of the rest of the organizations that sort of were built when data was very scarce and simple analysis and analytics was sufficient, this is all new. And you have to sort of create that, because without that culture change and that business transformation that's required, it's just not going to go very far. The other thing I'll also say to business, to data scientists, is if you're not enjoying your job, you should leave. There is a ton of opportunities in places that appreciate the skill set that these guys have, and so you have to create that. And this is sort of another topic I wanted to raise, which is the whole HR strategy and processes around attracting and uh, training and cultivating data scientists has to be revamped for many organizations,
Mm. Mm.
because for many organizations they don't yet have a data science career track, and what they have is woefully inadequate for data
Mm.
scientists. It's either a technology track or a business analyst track. Uh, and so you get sort of what you pay for. So you'll have adverse selection where, you might get folks that are really not the best, uh,
Mm.
because you're pigeonholing them into certain career tracks. So you have to create that career track. You have to create a very fun, collaborative, agile environment for these folks to have fun. And what I've also seen, having built these teams in
Yeah.
over the last several years, is they care a lot less about the brand and the prestige of the company that they work for. They care a lot more about what they do, who they work with, what they learn, and whether they're really, really putting their art and science that they've learned into creating value. And that matters more to them, I would say, than some of the more sort of prestige, uh, and brand related things that maybe the MBA grads might resonate more to. These guys are, scientists and artists
Mm-hmm.
at heart. They want to create,
Mm-hmm.
they want to see impact, they want to have fun doing it. And so HR strategists and practitioners have to create those kinds of environments for them.
I love that. I'm glad you're speaking to that because I've no one's ever mentioned that. So for these young data scientists who are just finishing school, they're beginning their careers, and they're listening to you and they're like, oh, what should a you know what should a career track look like? Like, what should someone look forward to in their development? If they're a good data scientist, they're enjoying what they're doing. They eventually want to become a leader, but they don't like really see that at the company they're at, or they're not even sure like what, because this is a new area for a lot of
Yeah.
people,
Yes.
and we're still figuring things out. So what kind of, as you've built these career tracks, like what should people be looking for, um, looking to do like in the
Well,
future?
yeah, I think it's a good question. And it's also important to notice that, like, data scientist isn't just sort of one thing, right? There's very different flavors of it. And so people could sort of pick and choose what appeals to them. But I'd say there is sort of the core data science roles, which are people who build and develop and improve algorithms and put them in production, right? So that's sort of the core role. There is the engineer role that sort of sandwiches this data science role, right? This is, so sandwiches it from the bottom by sort of building the modern stack architecture and data platforms, as well as on top the application layer that gets
Mm.
value. So those are
I like the way
engineers,
you put that. I like the way you put that.
right? Those are like software engineers that really understand the data science process. Um, and so let's say these three layers, right? They're all technical roles. So
Yeah.
clearly, one career track is getting more proficient as a technical leader, which could be sort of become eventually a guru of sorts, where you're sort of the innovator, the thinker, but not necessarily the leader of other teams, or you can become a technical lead. Okay, that's one. By the way, people move sometimes between these three layers of the sandwich, right? And so that's one. The second one is sort of the translator role. That's sort of, you sort of
Mhm.
have that exposure, and then you become a translator of AI and are sort of at the interface of business and AI, right?
Mm.
And and that will develop into a leadership role, because you're sort of managing the business outcome and you're managing stakeholders and all that. So what should you do? I mean, I would say, depending on where you are in your career. So I would say in the first 5 years, go deep in your trade, whether it's the machine learning engineering or whether it's the core data science or data and digital platforms. have that depth, but appreciate the ecosystem and sort of understand, like we talked about, how the rest of that sandwich comes together, and so that get comfortable with business problems. And because no amount of academic training will give you that. They will not give you the imperfect data. They won't give you the business pressure. They won't give you all the trade-offs. Get comfortable with understanding trade-offs. Get comfortable with writing documents and speaking with executives, because ultimately the best tacticians and the best scientists, the most successful ones, are also the ones that are able to have meaningful dialogues, right? With business folks to get impact. So now the first 4 or 5 years have passed. Now you decide which path you want to go, but be really, really good in your core trade, which is the core data science, measurement and statistics and all of that sort of things that go around it. Appreciate the full ecosystem and get comfortable with the process of taking a business problem and deconstructing it into an analytics problem. And this is obvious, but not everybody does that. Like many AI teams, many analytics teams wait for a business guy to tell them, I want you to predict this versus that. There's no dialogue. It's an assignment. And that has to change. And I would say mindset-wise, don't assume. I think one of the biggest pitfalls of teams and individuals is they make assumptions that, well, I thought this had to be done at 5-minute increments, or I thought that I could only use the library of tools that I have available, or I thought that I could not use external data. I didn't even think about it because like we have our own data, or I thought that I had to wait for the master data management initiative to finish before I could get an extract. So it's like, no, you don't have to think all of that. Like you could challenge these assumptions and you could challenge the actual components of the business problem. And I'll tell you, most of the fun and the problem solving starts at the problem definition. A fair amount of the problem definition is ambiguous. And it's really bad if you work on an ambiguous problem and 5 months later you find out that you solved the wrong problem.
I just love your advice around challenging assumptions and being very, very careful, because I feel like that is a big problem in so many different areas. I was just at a leadership training event, and the person on the stage said, how many people have been at the company for more than 3 or 4 years? And I raised up my hand, and he said, a lot of you have been institutionalized. And I was like, what? How dare you? And then the more I thought about it, I was like, oh my gosh, that is so true. Like
Right.
the longer you're with a company, you kind of like become part of the system. You understand the bureaucracy, what can be done, what's harder to get done, and you kind of accept certain things.
That's right.
And then there's more assumptions. Whereas somebody new, the organization tends to like, you don't know the rules, you don't know the bureaucracy, so you're more willing to challenge things and ask questions, or why can't we do this? And that's kind of the mindset that we all need to have all the time.
Yeah. I say this for the maybe older demographic of your audience. It's sort of like, do you remember MacGyver?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So
love MacGyver.
So for Generation Z, I guess, MacGyver is this guy that was really scrappy, and he would like save the world in the last like 30 seconds of the episode, right? He would figure out with a toothpick and a rubber band and something like how to defuse a bomb or how to like fly a plane or whatever. I think that's required. Like he like that is a little bit of, so when we were actually doing our own brainstorming around what sort of the archetypical successful data scientist, you need to be a little bit of a MacGyver, right? You need to sort of think about how do I challenge what I'm given and do more with what I have. And I'm not suggesting go build like a personalization solution with like toothpicks, but realize that very often the status quo doesn't need to stay the way it is if you begin to sort of challenge those assumptions.
That is so good. That is so good. Shervin, thank you so much for your time here on Data Talk.
Thank
For
you.
those that want to connect with you, follow you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So I'm on LinkedIn, and you could email me, Shervin@bcg.com. And yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. I'm going to create a short URL for everyone who's listening in so they can follow you on LinkedIn. And the short URL would just be ex.pn/Shervin, spelled Shervin. That's ex.pn/Shervin. That'll bring you over to Shervin's LinkedIn profile where you can follow him, connect with him there. Shervin, you've shared so much great insight for both for leaders and also practitioners who are looking to further their career. You definitely challenged me. I love your tips here. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for having this podcast. It's a very important topic.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Data Talk podcast with Dr. Shervin Khodabandeh. As you can tell, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I walked away just feeling encouraged, motivated, and also challenged to just work better, work smarter. And I loved his advice around being comfortable in ambiguity and also about challenging assumptions. I felt that was a really, really insightful comment and something that I really took to heart, something I need to practice more of. So I'm just grateful for his wisdom. And I want to highly recommend that you connect with him. You can find him on LinkedIn. The short URL to find him is just ex.pn/Shervin, and you'll find his LinkedIn profile there. And also, as you know, on this show, we're always looking for upcoming topics and guests to talk with. So if you have suggestions, please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn at Mike Delgado. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Experian Data Talk podcast, and we'll be back next week. Take care.